Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this first online lecture of the Belfast Summer School series. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, Mark McCahill. Mark is joining us today from London, and it feels like I had to mention it. It feels like we've gone back to the roots, the very beginnings of the Belfast Summer School in 2016, when Mark travelled from Scotland to Belfast for the first ever Greek classes. So I'm doubly delighted that Mark is here to kick off the lecture series. So Mark is a graduate of the University of Glasgow. He has a Master of Arts degree in Classics and Medieval History and a Master of Research postgraduate degree in Classics. His research interests include the built environment of ancient Rome and the impact of personal imprint by Rome's leaders upon the cityscape. So today's lecture will focus on ancestor masks and monumental exemplars, I hope I've got that right, and their significance in developing connections to source material via memory and visual engagement. And I'll share my screen now. And Mark, over to you.
That's great, Helen. Thanks very much. I'm just looking to minimize my own screen so I can actually read. So yes, thank you to Helen for this opportunity to speak to you all today. And as Helen says, as a former student in the very first cohort at the Belfast Summer School, I've some sense of what day one entails for the students who are attending today. And so I hope the virtual summer school is going well for all of you and that you find the lecture interesting. Also, a warm welcome to any other attendees for this lecture. So, as you'll see from the title slide there, the subject of this lecture today is Ancestral Legacy Imagery in Ancient Rome. Now, ancestral legacy imagery can take many forms, such as sculptural and likeness derived, architectural and dedicatory, textual and evocative, artistically representative, or an iconic and symbolic, to name a few. There is value in considering ancestor-linked imagery via different modes and media, although the forms of representation being discussed today are veristic, sculpted images, that veristic meaning kind of true to life, namely ancestor masks, busts, and reliefs. There is an additional case to be made for evocative texts that use energeia, that's an ancient Greek term meaning vividness, to help pictorialize ancestral images, especially where those images are no longer extant as physical primary source material. I consider this an approach that has value in place in this discussion, so we'll touch on the significance of that as we proceed. Move to slide 2, please, Ellen.
It's not working.
There we go. The main ancestral imagery forms for consideration are shown for reference on this slide. And from left to right, what we have are, I'm going to call it imagines majorum, or ancestor masks, and you're probably querying that already, but in their strictest sense and as they currently are understood, although it will become apparent that corroborating primary source evidence is a challenge in this regard, which is why I actually have a bust standing in for the mask. So I hope that will become clear as we go. Okay, the next in the series, we've got, sorry if you go back one, yeah, that's great, Ellen, thank you. We also have on this slide the Barberini Tollgate statue, which is housed in the Museo Centrale Montemartini in Rome. And that's what I'm offering as another example, as Imagines Majorum. And then last but not least is the Arapakis South Wall panel sculptural relief, which is showing the imperial family. This is housed in the Museo della Arapakis in Rome. So if I can make myself clear, my contention from the outset is this, that all of the forms just listed intrinsically contain legacy aspects that aid our appreciation of ancestral imagery. Therefore, the Tollgate statue and the Arapakis relief panel can be posited as valid forms of Imagines Majorum. The semantics of terminology become important here, whereby Imagines Majorum and Imagines more generally become interchangeable, and they help to clarify the intended differentiation of the forms. This prompts a reappraisal of the term Imagines Majorum itself, as it is usually limited to the wax mask variant. This is in light of sensory interaction with other forms and the ability to recollect ancestors just as effectively through alternative Imagines representing person, place, and time. Slide 3, please, Helen. So we have a veristic Roman bust as a stand-in for a wax mask, and that's not as comical as it sounds, as I hope will become apparent. So what the Romans knew as Imagines Majorum are family ancestors embodied in the veristic wax likenesses of the face, often displayed as memory objects in the family home and worn by representatives at ritualized events such as funerals and festivals. They are more commonly referred to as ancestor masks and represent the first of 3 key aspects of the lecture today. So I will point out they are commonly misreferred to as ancient Roman death masks, but should always be called ancestor masks, because while they were generally used posthumously, they were created during the life of the person memorialized, and they differed in use and purpose. The death mask then should be understood as specific to that end-of-life event, possibly onto inhumation, rather than as a visible totemic imago revered in the family home and at public ceremonials. With ancestor masks, the French academic Bernard Bourrie stated that Imagines Majorum where le visage de l'autorité sont considérés comme extrêmement ressemblants, or in English, the faces of authority considered to be extremely similar. They encouraged engagement of the mental faculties of the viewer to stimulate both memory recollection and emulation of esteemed ancestors and other esteemed Romans. These anthropomorphic material objects then became capable of generating or recalling memories, often with the potential for legacy resonances beyond the family circle. I'll move to slide 4, please, Helen. Monumental representation of the familiar imagery depicted upon the south wall panel of the Arapacus Augusti, or the altar of Augustus, hereafter referred to as the Arapacus, is also offered as performing the same Imagines Majorum function due to its unique and multi-generational depiction of the Augustan family. Imagines Majorum writ large, as it were. Rather than emphasizing the monumental and religious significance of the Arapacus, its value for the purposes of what we are discussing here is all about the interaction of observers viewing an object that facilitates ancestral memory provocation or creation, and which then reinforces the ancestral legacy message from the depicted relief Imagines. The imperial family and extended Roman magistracy, as well as the aristocracy and priestly office bearers depicted on the monument, present a visceral exemplar in marble of what can be seen, remembered, and celebrated at a given point in time, with resonances thereafter as those ancestral legacy images travel down through time from that day to this. While extant archaeological remains are fundamentally important facilitators of engagement and understanding of the past, like the Arapacus reliefs, it is important to stress the value both of their respective ancestral imagery links and, in the case of Imagines Majorum in their strictest sense, of the need for textual reference to corroborate non-extant ancestral imagery, and that delivers the full historical picture. Ancient texts are vital primary sources in this regard and are worthy of higher estimation, almost as pseudo-Imagines Majorum themselves through their evocative imagery, or energeia, as I mentioned earlier. One reason for taking this standpoint concerns what many might consider to be the perpetration of a fraud. There are no surviving wax Imagines Majorum. Perhaps now you can understand the challenge in trying to evidence them that I alluded to earlier, using the veristic Roman bust as a stand-in. Next slide, please, Helen. Whilst we do not have extant Imagines Majorum, at least not in the original wax form, as attested by Andrew Wallace-Hadrill and other scholars, we do in the extended sense I suggest here. Family busts become Imagines Majorum for the same purposes as the wax mask version, such as the Veristic Roman bust shown and the Barberini Togate statue seen here. Non-extant material objects notwithstanding, numerous textual references to the existence of Imagines Majorum from extant primary textual sources, such as Polybius, Cicero, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Tacitus, and Sallust, help the cause. Propensity then for material evidence over textual fails somewhat in this respect if there is over-reliance only on archaeological evidence. Therefore, it is worth reconsidering in light of that supportive textual evidence. Next slide, please. Whilst there are material and textual references to private exemplars and a sense of restricted home-driven ancestral image engagement, this personalised experience appears to have been better appreciated when, as Tacitus states, exhibited more fully within a ritual communal event like a funeral. I won't read the quote, I'll let you read through it now. The specific ancestral imagery forms here, Imagines Majorum ad infinitum almost, to validate and advertise the Augustan etiology, represent the pinnacle of Roman nobilitas, or the nobles, that encompasses the very recently deceased, those ancestors still celebrated perhaps in living memory, and foundation ancestors who would be the envy of however many Romans participated, either actively or passively, in the Imaginum Pompa, the ancestral procession. As Lewis Webb states, the spectacle inscribed the deceased into memory, locating them in a long line of maiores, or ancestors, and celebrated the continuity, social position, and status of the family. Next slide, please. The earliest first-hand recollection of the funeral use of Imagines Majorum from Polybius, a Greek emigre resident in Rome in the 2nd century BCE, may best frame the approach taken here as we consider ancestral imagery and the relevance of Imagines generally, particularly in a ritualized personal or communal context. Again, I have the quote from Polybius here, but I won't read it, I'll let you read that yourself. Whether the viewer, like Polybius, considers the Imagines of ancestors within the public spectacle of commemoration at a funeral, or within a public festival like the Parentalia, the term imago communis, or communal image, might be usefully employed here as an addition. Or if it's within the private sphere of the home, the term imago personalis, or personal image, might also usefully prevail. Although with scope for other physically extant or corroborative or mental objects to be relevant to the experiential element of broader ancestral imagery appreciation as Imagines Majorum. The public exposure of Imagines Majorum allows interaction for all, certainly, but evidence is scant to support a more detailed appreciation of the communal element to Imagines Majorum by a non-elite audience. While anything textual, material, or oral can generate simple Imagines, the contention is that personal or even communal engagement and redolent memories can provide a legitimate means to adapt Imagines Majorum away from its strictly understood term as an ancestor mask to a more expansive use of the term that includes, in certain circumstances, other types of Imagines as embodied ancestors. This would move us away from a limited understanding, facilitating a broader engagement with Imagines that fulfills the same purpose of celebrating and recounting the achievements, encounters, and memories of ancestors and friends that Imagines Majorum are generally understood to provide, per the established scholarship on this subject. While the frangible nature of wax as a medium means that Imagines Majorum have not survived the vagaries of time, of social upheaval, or of natural entropy over 2,000 years, Diane Favreau and Christopher Johansson point out the restricted practice of the Augustan era and beyond, followed by the ignominy of falling completely out of favour over a period of time post-Julio-Claudian Empire. This arguably reinforces the slim to impossible likelihood of survival. Next slide, please, Ellen. Additionally, Pliny the Younger highlights the negative impact of social proscription, that is, the practice of outlawing a Roman citizen and confiscating or destroying their property, on Imagenes, and official versus personal ancestral commemoration through ritual, as Pliny the Younger mentions. The quote is there, I'll let you read it. In the way Pliny discusses capital, the corollary between the imago personalis, that personal image, and the imago communis, or the communal image, is vivid here, with interplay between what is essentially domestic and private versus what may previously have been socially and communally shared until the time of prescription. Possession of, in this case, private family imagenes of formerly prescribed antecedents, Brutus and Cassius, assassins of Julius Caesar, and enemies therefore in perpetuity thereafter of the Roman imperial family, is a thing being lauded by Pliny, as is his friend's sentiment in ensuring familial legacy remembrance, even if that is restricted to the private domestic sphere. As the recovery of wax mass from the prominent recesses of the Lararia, or the domestic shrines in Roman homes, and the main hallways of ancient Roman homes has escaped a later audience, the ironic nature of reliance upon textual sources confirming the existence of non-extant material sources is worth acknowledging again. The work of Jan Assmann and Maurice Halbwachs is relevant to this acknowledgement, as their scholarship on collective and cultural memory reinforces the point being made here about the relevance and importance of ancestral legacy imagery substantiated via textual sources. For example, Cicero or Pliny the Younger's writings can be understood as providing collective ancestral memories, textually, that are relevant to the time frame Jan Assmann asserts, that is, within 80 to 100 years from the date of contemporary interaction with Imagenes Maiorum. And so are important source documents of the period discussing and acknowledging Imagenes Maiorum as ancestral legacy objects. With cultural memory, there is more of a historical legacy resonance over a much longer time frame. This lecture itself, then, could be understood to represent cultural legacy memory through a longer time frame of 2,000 to 3,000 years from the original events, involving the ancestral legacy imagery of Imagenes Maiorum. And that's regardless of whether comments are made on the textual primary source material or derived from the collective memory of Cicero and Pliny the Younger, or even possibly from my own assertions. We need therefore to consider the importance of Imagenes in a broader sense, particularly when the absence of the wax version of the ancestor mask is considered. The visual portrayal of a person, or of ancestry, or of Romanitas, that Romanness, which was key to the period, is displayed without the need to write or say anything due to the obvious characteristics displayed. Well, at least to an ancient Roman, let's say. As Diane van Favreau and Christopher Johansson state of ancient Roman writers and the role of Imagenes Maiorum, admittedly from their point in their strictest sense, as I am arguing against here, few detail the setting of the funeral or mention the sensorial impact, perhaps because they considered such perceptual information too obvious. Thus, the implication of this argument is that an ancient Roman would have the ability to look and see and understand the legacy link without explanation. This suggests that Imagenes Maiorum, therefore, are more usefully understood as those embodied ancestral objects previously mentioned and capable of provoking reaction. Next slide, please, Helen. Sorry, there we go. Excellent, thank you. As Salus suggests in a specific military context, and I will read this quote, I've often heard that Quintus Maximus, Publius Scipio, and other eminent men of our country were accustomed to declare that their hearts were set mightily aflame for the pursuit of virtue whenever they gazed upon the representations of their ancestors. It is evident that not the wax nor the effigy had any such intrinsic power, but rather it was from the memory of accomplishments that this flame swelled in the breast of exceptional men and could not be assuaged until their own prowess equalled the fame and glory of those models. Sallust illustrates the close connection between not only the visual significance of ancestor mass as facilitators of or catalysts for virtutem, virtue or a virtuous act, but also as a literary device to be read and appreciated in a similar manner by a contemporaneous or future audience, using text to deliver the same ardent desire to merit honour as stated in Sallust's quote. To expand on this, we see prominent placement of imagenes in the home, or possibly a suitable public space, as it's not clear from Sallust's quote, as exemplar of embodied Roman achievement. Memoria rerum gestarum, perhaps, that's the memory of accomplishments, that were always worthy of emulation. Not only is there a memory link, there is also that emulative quality with imagenes that provokes the need for achievement in beholders. But Sallust is also using the text as a means of pictorial depiction of that very scene, and its legacy imagery potential should not be dismissed. Next slide, please, Helen. Chiara Mazzeri's work with the Barberini Toget statue, shown here, we have an adult male holding two ancestor busts, makes very compelling viewing and provides a strong argument for a more substantial, harder-wearing, transportable bust or herm-style form of imagenes majorum, as seen being held by the main subject in the image here. This represents the typical generational type of imagenes majorum I am arguing for, with a living main subject at time of production, it's assumed, and busts to represent the deceased ancestors. If we accept the ancestral legacy prominence that imagenes majorum had within the ancient Roman home, and their possible placement beside or in proximity to a private ritual space like a lararium, that enclosure in the home for keeping the household gods, from a participatory standpoint, it is not unreasonable to suggest that, for example, children would behold, perhaps even interact with, the imagenes majorum on a daily or weekly basis as they toddled and scooted around the family home. Like most young children, there is a strong sense that they might also be looking on covetously at the lararium with its small figures or waxy visages or disembodied plaster or pottery or marble heads. I can almost hear you all say, "Don't touch." Next slide, please, Alan. Tibullus alludes to this possibility for interaction and the generation of ancestral legacy memory with a recalled memory of his own childhood specific to his household gods. The quote is there. Tibullus's recollection and the childhood interaction and concomitant opportunity to learn family history, as well as respectful observance of the space, is key. Acknowledgement of an important space, a locus sacratus, if you like, with ritual objects is very much part of that, and interlinked to how memory of place and time aids engagement with the ancestral memory object, thus allowing Tibullus to recall his esteemed ancestor and appreciate ancestral legacy imagery in the same thought in which he remembers his distant childhood. Using the child's perspective, participation in the parentalia or other religious festivals at which the family ancestors are on show is where the imagenes majorum as ancestral memory objects do their job best for family and for Rome alike. The child and others attending are repeatedly exposed to or reminded of family ancestors, with the imagenes majorum redolent of respected, possibly well-loved or revered ancestors and exemplars for the family, recollected and reanimated in that moment, and through the interaction of friends and colleagues also, as the embodiment and epitome of Roman mores, customs, Romanitas, that Romanness I mentioned, pietas, piety, virtus, virtue, and as an equally respected public servant, which will become important soon. Next slide, please, Helen. Moving the discussion on to gender, the various friezes around the north and south walls of the Arapacis, south wall panel relief here in front of you, predominantly display toga-wearing men, behatted male priests, disengaged or disinterested male children in their best finery, with soberly attired women included, but never truly prominent. This south panel might give you an idea of that. There appears to be a limitation in opportunity for some to participate in the ceremony, history, and legacy inherent in the ancestral symbolism of the event, as well as of the monument itself. Although this does not negate a positive experiential element for the purposes of engaging personally with ancestral legacy imagery. Public service selflessness and its legacy aspects place a considerable burden upon all of the depicted male attendees, ensuring the ancestor respect element of this religious ritual that all male participants are expected to embrace and engage with. The choice of the Arapaca South Wall panel, while pushing the boundaries of perceived wisdom on Imagenes Majorum as we seek to expand ancestral legacy imagery options, is intended as a new marker in the catalogue of ancestral images that prevail in Roman material culture, with its own strong etiological purpose. It is an honorific construction that celebrates the event and process of investiture of Augustus as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, with all of the associated pomp and ceremony, designation of place, and legacy aspects for all of the participants in such a momentous event. The facial images of the male religious participants, those priests, political attendees, and imperial family alike, could all, separately and collectively, be construed as Imagenes Majorum, recorded here for posterity in their obvious public offices, their family hierarchy, and their public function, for example, as the first family. The Arapaca South Wall panel is an emphatic, and some might say exaggerated, display of entitlement to display oneself for posterity. As a record of public office in post, and as a form of celebrating the possession of Imagenes Majorum through that and other public office. While it is fortunate that we have the remains of a monument which provides a clear narrative of public ritual and public office, of commemoration, of legacy, and of ancestral imagery, it flirts dangerously with an unfortunate conflation of meanings that could obscure the ancestral imagery purpose for our scholars. However, the South Wall panel is replete with meaning and is capable of being utilised to take the simple Imagenes of the panel and make it a far more powerful Imagenes Majorum. The significance of the many other notable Romans depicted within the friezes, the senatorial parade in the North Wall, for example, which is not shared here, is minimised, and this seems to be something of a gap in modern interpretation of the functionality of the Arapacis overall, although it is out with the scope of this lecture today. What is of note is expectation for the male family members depicted as those potential inheritors and, it is hoped, exemplary family members, although anyone who knows the Augustan imperial family will doubt that, with the Imagenes Majorum of Augustus and the monumental symbols and proofs of achievement, of high office, and of weighty legacy. It is hard to imagine other Imagenes Majorum more likely to cause some form of ancestral legacy inferiority. Next slide, please, Ellen. A different angle for ancestral legacy is provided by Pliny the Younger, with a grief-inspired suggestion of extending the commemorative legacy premise to the public sphere through statuary that mimics Imagenes Majorum. This follows the untimely death of his friend Sparina's young son, Cottius. The quote is there in front of you. Pliny asserts that the public and celebratory dimension is fundamental to the ancient Roman psyche. What Pliny also seems to be suggesting is that there is something intrinsically Roman and valuable in utilising the public sphere to proliferate engagement that reinforces ancestral legacy imagery. The opportunity to publicise a person, their achievements, and their commendable Romanness is a mode by which that opportunity might create an emotional connection, or a sensory connection, if you will. Notable historical exemplars, often incorporating supporting inscriptions lauding their achievements, are then on view, they are accessible, and they're available for emulation as legacy markers. Next slide, please, Helen. In the strictest sense, however, despite Pliny's laudable aims, his friend's son cannot be commemorated fully in the way envisaged. He was too young to have held his own public office, meaning he could never be meritorious in that particular respect through public service entitlement. By implication, there is a misuse of the intended statuary, at least as a ritualised public form of Imagines Majorum, although this is made moot by an imperial decree that follows and the ability of those involved to recognise the symbolism and the representational importance of the imperial legacy link gift. The redolent imago, even if not a strict form of Imagines Majorum, fulfills the purpose intended. Sparina is rewarded for his endeavours in war on behalf of the empire, while at the same time presented with a pseudo-triumphal statue of his son, in the hope that this will somehow assuage the calamitous loss and suffering that he has endured while he was engaged as a public servant on military service. The quote there from Pliny. The vicarious nature of ancestor remembrance through Imagines is fully illustrated here. While there is a memorial to a young man who died before his time, it is representative of something greater in that celebratory ancestral imagery monument than the future achievements the young man can now no longer attain. By constructing this mental object as a legacy image, Pliny demonstrates that it is crucial to the sensory social experience. Embodiment and epitomization are, therefore, important elements to note in the private and public celebratory aspects of commemoration here. Roman social traits are acknowledged as much as familial memory and recollection. Next slide, please, Ellen. In conclusion, with ancestral legacy imagery and Imagines Majorum, images are both personal within the scope of private remembrance, yet are able to fulfill the same function as if they were wholly communal. In ancient Rome, the important function of the Imagines as ancestral memory objects was to act as a catalyst for recollection, to enable reanimation of the spirit of the family ancestor, and to reinforce the ritualized aspects of communal appropriation and celebration of a person's achievements through their imago. Veristic Imagines, such as the ancestor masks, the busts, and the sculptural reliefs, provided legacy ancestor imagery that was both physically present and mentally codependent. Ancestor memory generation thereafter was simultaneously able to be personal and communal. The archaeological record, allied to extant textual record that often encompasses vivid depiction, gives us that robust historical canvas and is appreciable to interdisciplinary scholars in assessing the ancient experience of ancestral legacy. The importance of ancestral imagery interaction through engagement with veristic sculptural examples that act as memory objects allows that interpretation of imago, Imagines, and Imagines Majorum to deliver a fuller and more meaningful engagement through ancestral commemoration. Undoubtedly, there is some irony in textual primary sources verifying and validating material primary sources due to paucity or absence of that material evidence, but the exchange allows differing source materials to corroborate existence and substantiate the important place ancestral imagery had in Roman society. Modern scholarship has a part to play in querying differences, thus enabling Imagines to broaden the range away from an object-derived spectrum. Stronger resonances with cultural memory are then able to follow through monumental exemplars like the Arapakis. The potential for text to support the existence of non-extant sculptural imagery is a clear demonstration of alternative evidence acting as a facilitator of deeper engagement that can, and often does, provide emotional context with our memories. Although the emotional dimension of engaging with Roman material culture through textual references intertwined with memory, the polyvalent picture of sensate Roman society becomes convincing through this helpful lens. Relationships, place, custom and practice, and the prevalence of Roman ritual are all accessible and key to this. The Rome we are keen to understand and experience is effectively delivered through aspects of the personal interacting with the communal. Rites and ceremonies are replete with memory-laden practices and sites for the one and the many. In this respect, Imagines Majorum, in their fully expanded sense, are the perfect medium to achieve full engagement, whether we experience their benefits materially or textually as ancestral legacy imagery. Broader appreciation of Imagines Majorum demonstrates that embodiment and epitomization were important elements to note in the private and public memory links and the celebratory aspects of religious ritual for Romans. In addition, the Roman social traits of mores, those Roman customs, and Romanitas, or that Romanness, needed to be acknowledged as much as familial memory and commemoration. A strong sense of citizenship and responsibility to follow in ancestral footsteps was not only important, it was absolutely expected. Despite the limited nature of participation to elite Romans, dependent upon age and gender, the sense of responsibility instilled in them from a young age highlights that consideration of how engagement worked at personal level, regardless of status, assisted in emphasizing the significance of embracing ancestral legacy and achievements. The imagines majorum of old men long dead, whether ensconced in the family home or publicly revered as part of ritual practice, fulfill the primary purpose of generating admiration and emulation. Custom, national pride, moral code, and Roman manliness are not exuded by inanimate imagines replicas per se, rather, personal and communal exemplars are visible to family and citizens alike, maintaining a full agreement with Ovid when he stated, "Believe me, the image is more than it appears." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark.